welcome to the final part of this series. Today, I, wielder of the Triforce of Countdowns, will be bringing you the final entry of my ultimate wish list for the Breath of the Wild sequel. If you haven't seen the first two parts, I suggest you check those out first, because these videos build on each other to a moderate degree. To recap, here's the breakdown of what we'll be going over today. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content. And leave a comment down below if you'd like to start a discussion or pick my brain. There's probably a few things I have left out that I'd be happy to give my take on. Keep in mind once more that this is my own raw opinion, and I do like Breath of the Wild. And lastly, special thanks to Kevin ZEF and Awesome Face Prod for lending me their footage. Let's get right into the discourse. Side quests are much more meaningful and memorable when there is intrinsic enjoyment and depth, and not just apparent depth. Most quests in Breath of the Wild were fetch quests at their core that were given apparent depth by switching around the reasons for the fetching, such as the guy in Hateno Village wanting crickets to give to the girl he likes. Technically, even the Terrytown quest was mainly a fetch quest, but it's excusable because of the other aspects to it and because of how cool it was to build a town from the ground up. So some quests weren't exactly purely fetch quests, since there was some inherent intrigue, such as the Leviathan Bones quest or finding the bandit's treasure. But too many were shallow. The clear solution is to shave down a large percentage of the side quest count to focus more on each, and provide several really good quests instead of a mixed bag of dozens of them. The Zelda team need only look to their past for examples of great quests, like just about anything from Majora's Mask. The inherent reward of a quest is being enjoyable and worth playing. The external reward, or items gained, if there are any, can also be more significant when there are not so many quests. For one idea, well, heart pieces or stamina shards, anyone? Breath of the Wild had an awful lot of rupee rewards. We need more compelling collectibles in this sequel. Korok seeds were alright, but ideally we want something less repetitive that actually instills a desire to collect them all, because I, usually a completionist, never had any drive to collect all 900 Korok seeds. There also might as well be a better reward than a pile of fecal matter for collecting them. I also feel that future collectathons could have more creative incentive than Breath of the Wild. The incentive seemed to essentially be to make the game less frustrating by having more room for cool stuff. I think a good collection quest does these things right, some of which go hand in hand. 1, there's intrinsic reward, they're fun to collect and none are too cryptic. 2, there's a reasonable amount of the collectible, not too many and not too little. 3, there's an intrinsic reward, a worthwhile, helpful reward. And, perhaps most optionally, an interesting or weird backstory, like the Post-Soul or Golden Bug quests in Twilight Princess. One quest that I would say fulfills all 4 criteria pretty well is the Stray Fairies quests in Majora's Mask. And of course, heart pieces have always been my very favorite collection quests, so that's another reason I felt a lack of stirring collectibles in Breath of the Wild's world. The subtle piano themes were nice and welcome, but I also do crave some of the strong orchestral songs, both generally and area specifically, like Dragon Roost Island or Twilight Princess's Hyrule Field. Something I think could work well is that notable locations have their own strong tunes, and the subtle piano could exist in the less notable locations. As an example, Lake Hylia could have its own memorable theme, and maybe other lakes too if they were important enough. I know Skyward Sword had Lake Floria. And then there could be a specific piano theme for all the lesser lakesides in the world. Now that would essentially be a happy medium between Breath of the Wild's musical philosophy, not that it didn't have some strong tunes, and that of previous games. But as I pondered, I realized what I think would be the most ideal for this game is a score composed mainly of strong dynamic tracks and subtle chilling tracks, like the trailer theme. At the same time, that was totally not subtle, though. Music should fit a game, so this one should have spooky tracks to fit the presumably dark theme, and strong, memorable tracks like Classic Zelda to fit the epic quest I hope it will feel more like again. Voice acting was an interesting direction for the series. I don't think it's absolutely essential for Zelda, and in Breath of the Wild, I'd say the English overall had a neutral effect. But I'm sure Breath of the Wild sequel will follow suit and include it, so I'll say what we need from it. Refinement, put simply. There shouldn't be any major discrepancy of quality between dubs, and voice quality should definitely be consistent within a given language, which wasn't the case in the English. Some were good, and some were cringy or poorly done. We especially need improvement from Zelda's voice. I say that not because hers was the worst, or even to say it was necessarily bad, but just because she's a huge character, so her performance in particular must be top-notch. Overall, I think she was okay in Breath of the Wild. I don't think she was as bad as some think, but could certainly be improved. Here are the opinions that I can confidently articulate, all of which are meant to be constructive and not disrespectful to the voice actress. Firstly, her emotion could be expressed better, even considering her whole weight of the world on her shoulders characterization. There were some scenes that fell flat because there was a gap between the emotion that the dialogue, syntax, and circumstances implied as being there, and the emotion expressed in Zelda's voice. Second, she doesn't quite sound like a 17-year-old girl, which is her age in the game. I don't think her usually composed disposition explains this either. Even in the scenes where she's unfettered and lit up, like in the memory Silent Princess, where she tries to get Link to eat a frog, she doesn't quite sound her age. She shouldn't sound overly cute and hyper-precious like she kinda did in the Japanese, but she should sound younger. The English voice actor already raised the natural pitch of her voice for the role, and that didn't solve it, so I'm uncertain how this could be done. And thirdly, I don't think the accent worked very well. It's sort of understandable how people picture that as the accent of a royal princess, but it seemed forced in Breath of the Wild, and I suspect it contributed to both of my above critiques. Overall, it didn't quite work for me. Because this is also divisive, it's tempting to say that voice acting isn't worth the trouble. I've been able to attach a voice to almost every Zelda character in the past based on their mannerisms, expressions, appearance, dialogue, and certainly by the little sound clips that played as they spoke. There's a plethora of major or minor characters I was able to craft a mental voice for in nearly every game, except perhaps some older ones where the appearance, dialogue, sound clips, etc. were unrefined or not present. Yet, voice acting has the potential to make cutscenes more fluid and cinematic, and to breathe more life into characters, so if done very well, it is more than welcome. Breath of the Wild's combat was varied with cool little moves like the downward thrust when you attack straight from the paraglider, but I think there's room for concrete expansion. Particularly, I think we could use some extra techniques for the weapons themselves, things like the hidden sword skills in Twilight Princess or Minish Cap. Twilight Princess's sword combat felt so varied. There were even things to discover that the game didn't tell you about, like the cool thrust Link does if you attack as you finish rolling. Other awesome moves were the finishing blow, the back slice, the helm splitter, the mortal draw, and the simply epic jump strike. The flurry rush added in Breath of the Wild pales in comparison to these. Breath of the Wild hid a relative lack of enemy variety under varying forms or colors of the same enemy. Sometimes this was a somewhat decent change, as with Lizalfos, but it's not sufficient. Variety goes way beyond increasing an enemy's health bar or adding enemies with new names and looks, but the same strategy. Enemies like bokoblins and moblins could sometimes be engaging through new approaches, but weren't authentically unique on their own. We need new enemies with item strategies, or at least different base melee strategies. They don't need to be a complex puzzle to defeat, just something other than slashing your sword until they're out of hit points, like how redeads can freeze you, or how you can use the claw shot on Helmasaurs to remove their armor, or the unique Gust Bellow strategy on the Armos in Skyward Sword. I'd like to see some new enemy types, but also want some classic enemies like those to return too, including, but not limited to, Darknuts, Tektites, Armos, Stalfos, Dodongos, Skulltulas, Poes, and Chilfos, so long as they fit with the game. Probably this mechanic wouldn't be called the Blood Moon if it appeared again, but whatever the title, I don't want the return of the concept. I don't have many logical reasons for cutting it, but it did erase the sense of completion of enemy camps. I know it existed to provide constant supply of weapons in case the player spent indefinite hours in the world, and to dial up the enemy difficulty, but the difficulty problem ran much deeper than needing longer health bars, and my dislike for the Blood Moon does run deeper than frivolous annoyance at the return of enemies and having to skip another cutscene. My core issue is that it doesn't feel Zelda-like. As Breath of the Wild progressed, the difficulty tapered off, assuming you weren't deliberately employing gameplay methods to keep it consistent. We just need a better balance, not unfair or requiring incredible skill, but not too easy, where skill can be built, but you don't have to be ridiculously good to avoid death in a playthrough. There must be an enduring balance challenge, while also having the feeling of growing stronger that item progression gives. As Breath of the Wild went on, its challenge was more so that of your patience, with enemies ever increasing health bars. Gradually adding enemies, new enemies, mind you, not different colors of the same enemy, that do a bit more damage could scale well with the player. This would be a lot easier to do if it happened through the progression of a center stage story. For example, Stalfos weren't added in Ocarina until the Forest Temple, and Iron Knuckles not until even later. There could also be a difficulty curve proportional to the development of skill, like requiring more tense timing for getting in hits, like an Iron Knuckle, I guess, or needing to attack within a specific zone of time. Would you look at that, like Ocarina Stalfos? This curve also comes with greater enemy variety, as I've spoken about. Different strategies keep enemies fresh and bring challenge at least from analyzing for their strategy, or performing the strategy if you already know it. Remember how I mentioned Armos from Skyward Sword? Those fights always kept me on my toes, evading them while making sure to blow the bellows the right direction. That's how multifacetedness brings its own challenge. Many enemies can be challenging just by being different and testing different skills. Increasing damages also preserves that challenge, but it has to be in a sensical way. The same enemies shouldn't do more damage later on just because it's later on. That's another reason for gradually adding new enemy types, so that that damage increase can come through them, along with challenge by having unique item strategies. Enough said. I would just really love a tone like this, so long as nothing else is sacrificed, such as being so weird that it's an incoherent mess. If the Switch 2.0 rumors are true, this one is much more likely, because it's unlikely for the normal Switch to improve much at running the same world. I don't care about 4K, but I hope the game can at least reach 1080p resolution and have consistent 60 frames per second. Maybe also less pop-in and such. The art style itself is gorgeous and needs no tweaks. I don't have super convincing reasons for this, but it would naturally flow from the challenge being better balanced out. There would also be too many heart pieces to reasonably expect with 30 hearts, especially alongside stamina pieces. 76 assuming 4-piece containers and 9 dungeons. Majora's Mask, which had the most up until now, had 52. This may seem like a desperate wish to have yet another facet of classic Zelda back, but if you think about it, what was the need to bump it up in the first place? Anything besides wanting to put 120 shrines in the world? If done to offset the ridiculous damage some enemies deal, couldn't that same damage proportion have been retained with 20 hearts? In a typical Zelda game, an overarching time limit is inapplicable, but I wouldn't have a problem if there was a well-implemented time limit in a few segments. I liked expanding your map in Breath of the Wild and Majora's Mask. The weird thing is that all Hyrule's towers would already be activated in the sequel, and if my wish holds true, we won't have the Sheikah Slate. If there's a new map to piece together for the alternate world, though, something like Majora's Mask system would be cool. There's definite charm to well-done companion characters, but I don't think there's a need for one if Zelda is already journeying with Link in this one. But it would be interesting if something like the glowy hand that's on presumably Ganondorf's body has a consistent role that could make it vaguely comparable to a companion. Maybe it could communicate with Link and Zelda throughout, even if just strangely pointing a certain direction at some point or something. Or maybe it could be necessary to open dungeons or seal away bosses. One Zelda staple is, of course, instruments. I'm uncertain how one could be incorporated. I couldn't provide certitude unless I was myself writing the story, which would mostly be a waste unless I could incorporate some ideas into a novel. It's one of the tragic truths of creating a list like this. None of it will ever be fulfilled perfectly, and even if so, someone else might be disappointed by what is my ideal Zelda. Anyways, my only idea for this is perhaps a song that sealed things away throughout the game, like bosses. Bosses could have some sort of continuity between them that allowed for instrument inclusion, without losing creativity and variety as the Blights did. Nearly every Twilight Princess boss was possessed by the Twilight, for example. If this game had a similar concept, maybe that corruption could group together and be sealed away by Link after the fight. But I'm unsure whether that's the best route for bosses in this. So I have no definitive, magnificent idea for instrument usage, though harnessing a sacred power that combats dark forces is a cool basic idea. This relates vaguely to the next section, which came to mind from writing this one. This isn't a huge deal, just a tiny embellishment. There's nothing wrong with Breath of the Wild, and it's very fitting. It's just not as cool as many others. Just think of how awesome yet simple others sound. Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Oracle of Ages, Phantom Hourglass, Ocarina of Time. This is the quintessential example, I think, and is also the tie to the last section, since this title involves an instrument. As a random note, a word that I think would be really cool in a Zelda title is Requiem. It's probably not relevant for this game, but I just thought I'd mention it. Okay, I was originally pondering whether this could be cool in this game, but I've reached a consensus. No. I don't think a choice system could be in Zelda without compromising its identity. It doesn't mold well with the story Zelda tells to have endings that vary depending on player choice. There is the timeline split based on Link's fate at the end of Ocarina of Time, but that's different. I briefly mentioned earlier the power of good voice acting for increasing cinematic feel. I guess what I mean when I say cinematic is the sense of being on an epic quest. That's part of what I love so much about Twilight Princess. Every single thing is permeated by a sense of adventure and being part of an epic. Every boss battle, even if some are easy. Every mini-boss, every dungeon, every location, every story snippet. I even like the parts that most people loathe, like the Twilight sections. I've already discussed how dungeons, bosses, and other aspects can be optimized for this adventure, so my main point/wish here is that this sense of adventure returns by way of strong cutscenes. This is random, but I realized that even the title screen of Breath of the Wild is really unspecial. It's almost a microcosm for the game as a whole. Not bad so much as it is dissatisfying, missing something magical. I say it's unimportant, but honestly, Zelda title screens are usually something special and memorable that add tangible joy, however small. It's something you watch when you first boot up every other 3D Zelda game, except Skyward Sword, before beginning the playthrough, so it's sad for it to be lacking. Before we get to the section you've all been waiting for, I have two bonus sections for you guys. First off, I must hold and pet the doggos. It is my destiny. And secondly, a comment on the DLC. The Master Cycle Zero was fun, but really broke the fourth wall way too much for me. If they really had to add a vehicle to Zelda, did it have to be a motorcycle or something as modern seeming as that? The Sheikah technology crossed the line for me at that point into feeling super out of place. For some reason, the Guardian swords and such weren't too much for me though. Maybe because they still seem fantastical at their core. Well, there you have it. You know you've got a cool wish list on your hands when there's not a single mention of gyro puzzles. Because I'm willing to talk about the problems that are actually most incumbent to this game's flourishing, and not frivolous things like that. But I guess they might as well be canned since most people didn't like them, or at least they should be less wonky. Despite being dead last, this section is one of the most important and tricky. Maybe that's why I put it off. So, Zelda was playable in Spirit Tracks, but not in recognizable getup and only in one area. What's in this game may very well be a much more wide-ranging mechanic. One thing that would be cool is, of course, getting to use Zelda's magical abilities. These could expand, but perhaps less quickly than Link's item system, and Zelda's abilities shouldn't be the exact same in function to Link's item system, so that her array of abilities could just as easily be transferred to him. And they shouldn't just be Zelda magic counterparts of items like the hookshot or hammer that usually go with Link's arsenal, save for a few that might translate exceptionally well, like the lantern. But generally, her ability set should go beyond that and be something more creative, new, and set apart. As far as specific ideas for abilities, I feel we have to trust the developers to make them befitting to the Zelda they're trying to create. I'm a little devoid of ideas myself. There are a few magic items of past Links that could transfer well to Zelda, like Din's Fire, the Cane of Samaria, or the Dominion Rod. And in Ocarina of Time, she used telekinesis to lift up doors as Hyrule Castle collapsed. She could maybe have something like that. But for the best idea of what her abilities could look like, let's look at her in Breath of the Wild. While I'm picturing a more colorful array of magic, in reality, Zelda's power seems fairly limited to certain things. It was only one species, radiant magic, shall we call it, manifested by a white light with a yellow tint. That's how it was when she defended Link from a Guardian, as well as when she sealed away Calamity Ganon. Both times she did essentially the same thing, banishing malice/dark power. That doesn't necessarily restrict her ability set. First off, maybe she could develop more inborn capabilities as she grew personally. Secondly, that same energy could theoretically take different forms still, and there's creative room for it, even if it remain limited to powers of banishing. There could be something similar to the whip from Skyward Sword, for example. One complication is that if Zelda is always or almost always with Link in the adventure, there are serious implications for a whole gamut of things. Whenever Link climbs, will Zelda also be climbing beside him? Will she be just as proficient as him, a Knight of Hyrule? Would things like their alleged disparity in climbing ability really be taken into account for gameplay? Could she use magical abilities to scale walls? What about armor? Will there be feminine versions of every outfit to maximize customization, for those who actually like it, that is? And if Zelda and Link are both used in boss fights, that could either go very wrong, or could lead to some of the series' most creative fights. I hope some bosses would mainly focus on Link as usual, but there could definitely be some collaboration with Zelda. There are easy ways to make her not a part of every fight if they wanted to allow for a good mix of new and old. For example, if they were separated mid-dungeon, or if she was working in the background to help vanquish the boss, like Groose was in the imprisoned fights. A playable Zelda could also complicate dungeons, puzzles, heart pieces, and how rewards generally might apply to both of them, and healing. I'm guessing Link's health would still be the primary determinant for game overs and such. So, there are three main ways Zelda could be playable. 1. Being able to switch between Link and Zelda on demand. 2. Being able to play as her in certain segments, such as in certain dungeons or if she was separated from Link for part of the story. And 3. A combination of those two. Being able to switch at any point in the game on demand might feel a little too much like LEGO Star Wars, and could be really off-putting in a mainline 3D Zelda game. On the other hand, if Zelda could only be commissioned to do certain actions, like it was in Spirit Tracks, that could feel very gimmicky and detached. Having her playable just in certain segments or for certain types of things, like some dungeons or bosses, would be by far the easiest and least contentious thing to do, just tweaking that delicate part of the formula very slightly. The only thing I for sure do not want is for the main quest to be co-op. Mainline Zelda quests are meant to be single-player. All of these tricky questions make this mechanic fairly questionable. I trust Nintendo to pull it off well if they go for it, but all these dilemmas make switching between Link and Zelda not what I want to see become the standard. That might also hinder the novelty of it. That doesn't mean I wouldn't like to see it in the future from time to time with different worlds and game engines. And even if worst came to worst in this game, what they do with Playable Zelda would be an experiment, with positive impact on the series' posterity, if they wanted to try it again later. This list was incredibly fun and thought-provoking to put together, so thank you so much for watching. If you've stuck around for the whole series, thank you especially for that. Remember to leave a like if you enjoyed, and feel free to start a discussion down below. Again, I'm sure there are things I left out, so my brain is just waiting to be probed. And hey, do you like dungeon rankings, boss rankings, and Zelda countdowns just like that? If so, subscribe. And I, wielder of the Triforce of Countdowns, intend to bring you just that. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you and have a fantastical day.